How important do you think trust is? And of course, you will now say, well, trust is, of course, crucial. How important do you think is that leaders have trust in what you do? And of course, you say, well, that's obviously crucially important. So when you say this is all so obvious, the question is, why are we where we are right now? We're going to talk about leadership, trust, and the benefit of the doubt today, because we have a situation at the moment which developed. It's almost like a deja vu for me, because we are reliving through times which I thought we pretty much had behind us 20 years ago. When we now look at what we recently saw in press and also in science, we see that many young people at the moment say anyone is talking about a lack of talent, anyone is talking about a lack of workforce. We have workforce shortage, we have talent shortage. However, at the same time, people struggle to find a job, especially when they're younger. So the entry to the job market gets more and more complicated almost all over the planet. So when we now look into this topic, hello and welcome to this week's episode. We're going to talk about leadership trust and the benefit of the doubt. And I will again, of course, quote from real world press press sources. And of course, science backs what I'm saying here. And everything I quote here, very important, is disclaimer. Always, I can always show, because when you now watch on YouTube, you will see the real world sources. And of course, when you're on the podcast, I'm going to tell you what the sources say. I'm allowed to quote them under fair dealing, fair usage in the UK and the US, and Zitierrecht quotation right in the German-speaking area. So when you now saw the article, there are young people now who say they have been turned away from 500 jobs. And that is not a propaganda newspaper. That was published by the BBC, backed by sources. 500 jobs. And I mean, let's face it, my time was probably quite tough. However, back in the days when I grew up, we had the reunification of Germany, which of course was a historic event. Lots of people came from East Germany to Western Germany for better jobs, other opportunities, the collapse of the socialist, communist GDR. That was a very special situation. Of course, the workforce pushed in, making it very challenging for many people to find enough work. And almost 2 out of 3 of my back in the day student colleagues didn't find the work they wanted. I was lucky to be one of the picked ones who found a job which I actually like to do. When you now look at the data, and we now have data where you can see proven we have youth unemployment, which in the UK already is at 15%, but in London is up to 24%. 24% amongst the 16 to 24-year-old people. At the same time, people say they are constantly labeled as either bleak or lazy. They think no one of you wants to work anymore. And of course, that is of course not the case when you just mass generalize here. At the same time, the government says we are doing more to get young people into work, and we have to talk about the law and the legal situation as well of hiring young people and hiring people when you have certain doubts about should you hire or should you not hire them. So welcome to today's episode. How do we deal with this as leaders? When we now say we have this situation, it is pretty obvious that we know that we need to give people jobs for the future of any country. High youth unemployment always is a massive issue. The situation at the moment says we have high youth unemployment. And of course, you can say, well, that's temporary. We had that in the 90s. We probably had it somewhere in the 70s. So roughly every 20 years, this just happens. It always sorts out. That's, of course, one approach. However, the fingers crossed approach, as Chris Hadfield says, is never an approach. By the way, Chris Hadfield is an astronaut. And the astronauts always say, you're not going to sit on 500 tons of kerosene or whatever they use to get into space, saying, fingers crossed this is going to work, because fingers crossed is not an approach in leadership. When you have this youth unemployment, you create a situation where we have so-called needs, spelled N-E-E-T. And needs means they don't need work. Well, obviously they need work, but N-E-E-T, the term needs, means they are not in education, employment, or training. And that, of course, is becoming a massive issue. Because what happens when you are not in education, not in employment, and not in training? It simply means that people say, I lose hope for the future. I probably, when I'm lucky, I live at home. If I don't have an abusive home or anything else of a situation where I say my life is basically unbearable, then people lose completely faith in anything they have and any kind of optimism they have towards the future. Some people then fall on the state system. They receive benefits or anything similar. And at the same time, people say, well, maybe I can do, let's say, when there's no proper job out there, maybe I do a bit of job on the side being paid cash in the hand. And cash in the hand work then suddenly becomes very appealing, because people say, look, when I have cash in the hand work, it simply means I can do something with that. Benefits plus cash in the hand work. Maybe not great, but pretty decent. And that is something where no system and no country can work on. No economy is able to work with that. No economy is able to sustain with that. The consequences of that is severe because people, once they're out of the system and they say, look, I may be a loser, or the system isn't for me, or no one wants me, or whatever else conclusion they have, usually it goes south from there. So we have to see which challenges do we have. And one challenge I really thought we have behind us, but especially today, people apply for jobs and the answer is they are too inexperienced. And when I asked them, okay, where should they get the experience from? And often people then say, when people are just 19, 20, 21 years old, then, okay, here we go. You're not saying they are too inexperienced. You just change the terms. I remember back in the days when I came from university, end of the 90s, I started my part of the working world started end of the 90s. And back in the days, they simply said too young. They don't say too young anymore for a very simple reason, because there are laws in place now which prevents them from doing so. When you say too young today, it is an active case of discrimination. And people, of course, know you shouldn't discriminate because that can become pretty expensive pretty quickly. But what they do is they simply change the term. They do not change anything with the real consequence of it. They simply change the word. They say, oh, I don't use that word anymore, meaning I simply use the exact same meaning, just exchanging the term young to young with too inexperienced. And here, of course, is the question that many young people have. You expect me to have experience. At the same time, you do not pay according to someone being experienced. And besides that, when you don't hire me because you say, hey, you need a network, you need a reference, you need an internship, you need any kind of connection to get into the organization, the application without any connection is basically pointless. So when you say all of that and you say you need to have experience, where should young people get the experience from when no one hires them? Or people simply say, oh, I always go for the more experienced person. And by the way, what they really mean here, just to be very straightforward, they don't mean too inexperienced, they simply mean too young. It's an arbitrary number where people say, I don't like the two numbers next to your name. Only to then, because then say, hey, there are experienced people on the market, look here. And then they say, oh, these people, when you're over 40, over 50, bit too, they are, how to say, I think they are too experienced for the position. What you really mean is you don't like their salary wishes, which is based on the experience you actually asked for. And also what you don't like is their name and their age again. You simply say, oh, the number over 40, the number over 50, they don't want to change. They don't want to do that, especially today when you hear people saying, oh, the older people, and the older people meaning usually anyone over 40 already today. So people say the people who are older can't deal with AI. Piece of information here. Who do you think invented the computer systems on which everything today is based? These are the people who today are over 40, over 50, or over 60. Mass generalization, you basically split the whole thing in two halves. You say, oh, people at 19, 20, 21, somewhere there, all too young. Oh, but sorry, too inexperienced. And on the other hand, over 40, we say maybe too experienced because too old is age discrimination, right? So you basically give a window of 10 years, maybe 15, where people are the right fit. But then you say, oh, don't ask for too much money, right? You should be highly motivated, but you can't get much money. I know that life becomes more and more expensive and rent goes through the roof, but you can't make much money because our industry doesn't pay that well. And then you are surprised that motivation in the job market goes down. People calling in sick goes through the roof. While at the same time, people say it all feels a bit pointless at the moment. It feels a bit like we're going downhill at record speed. And I'm not going to join the Chumbawamba of everything's getting worse and worse here. However, we need to see a situation that recruiting at the moment is, let's say, not in the best shape. Very politely said. When you say, on the one hand, too inexperienced, too young, on the other hand, you tell people they are too experienced. What you really say here is you simply do not trust anyone anymore. And sometimes you have recruiters who simply say, look, I only do what I got told by other leaders. I do not trust people because no one trusts me here. As soon as I say, oh, I think this young person should be taken in, they show great attitude. They say, really? You want to bring that person in from that background with a bachelor's degree and not a single year of experience? What kind of recruiter are you? Find better candidates. Or when you say, hey, we have this great person, really great experience, 55, really engaged, really wants to get into the market. And then your senior leader says, oh, you want to get one of these old farts in here? You know what the risk is? We can't get them out if we want to. They stay here forever. They're going to sue us. It's going to be really expensive. No, we don't hire anyone there. You shouldn't be surprised that any system acting like this is not going to sustain. It's going to be a big bang in one way or the other. Worst case is you get regulation where you suddenly have to hire people, and then usually the regulation only knows one way, and it means tighter, tighter, tighter. So we need to be more open, and we're talking about trust here. What you need to do, and that is something which is of crucial importance as a true and excellent leader, you need to give people either a leap of faith, make a leap of faith, or give them simply the benefit of the doubt, where you say, look, you leave a good impression. I don't know if you're up to the job. You look like you really want to do this, and we try it from here. You're a young person, and I give you the chance to really prove that you're worth your salt here. And by the way, one aspect which I now fully understand is that people say, look, when I give people the benefit of the doubt and I am wrong, I might get fired, or I might get serious consequences from that, because they always talk about, oh, we are open for errors, but they're actually not. And that's an organizational cultural problem. Organizational culture needs to be open that certain errors can be made. That does not mean that anyone can mess up massively deliberately. But it means that when you make errors, mistakes, handle something in a way it shouldn't be, that we learn from that. And of course, there's one omnipresent fear, a fear which is all over the place at the moment, that people say, oh, when I do something wrong, I will suddenly sit on the other side of the table, being somewhere in the mess of looking for a job, not being sure if I find anything out there. So the fear that is there it's instilled by bad leadership. And the leadership is simply that people say you can't make any mistakes. We're looking for the best people, but either they are too young, too inexperienced, or they are too old, too experienced, too risky, whatever else. And there's a tiny bit in between where you then say, oh, well, you're somewhere in the mid stage. Don't expect too much of payment benefits, whatnot else. So you're basically making the whole working world at the moment one big piece of not you, not here, not right now. And that is becoming a massive issue. I know that when you, for example, are a managed service provider in the IT field and you sell services, you want to have great salespeople, and you wonder, look, you need 2 years to learn everything we do here. But the experienced people on the market, we can't afford. So first, when you're an MSP, managed service provider in the tech field, you usually make good money, and then you can afford to pay people well. If you don't do that, you've done something wrong with your spending. You simply don't want to pay people well, and that is, of course, not reasonable behavior. Great work needs great pay. And by the way, pay aligns with the living costs around you, and when costs of living go up, 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 so will salaries. No question about that. However, when you say we need the experienced people, and of course there's a very different price tag with them, and you don't want to pay them, you have to go for one route or the other. You can say, I hire someone with less experience, bit of a lower price tag, and then qualify them. Or you hire someone who is more experienced with a higher price tag and then benefit from their experience. However, this fear of doing something wrong, I can tell you first, you have probation time. When you don't know after probation time if people are worth their salt, you really should wonder, do we actually have a structured and documented approach to onboarding? Or do we just say, look, my door is always open. Go for it. Good luck from here. And you do not really have an onboarding process. Do you really have an onboarding process? Or do you have rather a situation of chaos where anyone needs to go along and find something and say, oh, I think the doors are always open, but they are always busy, so I'm Googling myself through the internet, use Google resources, try to find something in Salesforce and figure out everything by myself, which, by the way, way too often is the way in organization? Or do you actually have a buddy system where mentors took on different parts, where people go from one person to the other, getting properly onboarded, so you do everything within your means that people actually get the starting point in the organization properly? On top of all of that, please do me one favor, and that is extremely important now. Look at your own career. Look at your own career, because what we are lacking at the moment is the self-reflection of leaders is to say, how did my career actually go? And often, quite too quickly, people say, well, no one gave me anything on a silver platter. I can tell you I grew up in Barmstedt, a small village in northern Germany. Please look that up. English is not my first language. And from this small village, I made it to Hamburg, to Berlin, then London, today living in Zurich, London. Next week, I'm in New York City again, one out of 4 weeks where I'm going to be in New York City only this year. So it went pretty well. But what happened in due course of this career? I remember vividly that one colleague who I knew in the pharmaceutical industry, my first industry after going from uni, and my education was being a teacher. So I already came in with a non-traditional degree into the pharmaceutical world. And one colleague said, look, I'm not sure if you can do this, but I think you can. We will try right now. And he gave me that benefit of the doubt, and my career took off from there. Of course, you have to show engagement. You need to work hard. And you probably, that is something where we will disagree with some people here. In my opinion, especially when you want to get into an industry, you need to work hard, which most likely happens beyond the 35-hour working week. And that, of course, comes along with challenges that we need to address. We can't solve this in this episode right now, but if you want to have a career, engagement and highly efficient and effective work is part of that. You can't just sit there and do standard work and expect extraordinary pay and results. However, the reflection saying, was not your own career based on someone saying, look, I give you the chance to prove if you're worth your salt. It happened with me, with my British employer, which was a British pharmaceutical company. And it happened especially with my American employer. I was self-employed already, but they didn't need to give me the trust. I was in my beginning mid-20s, being a young self-employed consultant there. And there was a senior leader who was way into their 50s, but still had to carry massive personal risk saying, Niels, come on, after your seminar today, sit down, I show you something. And he showed me an intranet where he says, okay, look, this is a place where you can develop yourself, where you can apply for a certain career path, and you can use my name as a reference here. And from there, I suddenly found myself flying from Hamburg via Frankfurt to Los Angeles, going to Anaheim to a franchise headquarters, and then developing a massive international career based on someone saying, I think you can do this. And of course, I showed engagement. I worked hard. I worked long hours. And I can tell you, and again, I don't want to start an argument here, but I worked way, way more than 35 to 40 hours a week, way more, 60 hours plus. So I really showed engagement here. I think at least that was their feedback. This reflection we need that you say, my career was based on someone giving me the chance because they saw something. They took on personal risk. They took on organizational risk. We need to get back to the point where we really show engagement into a certain level of risk. By the way, especially in free enterprise, our whole claim against the state where we say you need to lower taxes, you need to loosen regulation, and the whole gist around that is we take the risk. But at the moment, I simply don't see that people take the risk. There are a few organizations who have a very reasonable approach to risk. Many organizations saying, look, it's either too young, too inexperienced, or it's too old, too experienced, too expensive, too risky, we can't get rid of them, etc., etc. Or they simply say, we're not hiring anyone because we can never get rid of them. You can get rid of people within probation time. If your probation time simply is an El Dorado of good luck from here, you shouldn't be surprised that your Glassdoor.com profile or Kununu profile, that's the German equivalent, looks like the massacre it actually most likely is right now. You need to engage in proper onboarding and giving people the benefit of the doubt, a leap of faith, where you say, I'm not sure if you can do it, but you will find these golden nuggets, the brilliant people who are out there who simply say, thank you for the chance, and I will show you that I'm able to do it. I am worth my salt. And also, and that is crucially important from here, you need to see that the whole economy is based on giving people chances. It happened to us. It happened to others. So why did we suddenly stop doing that again? Because someone higher in the hierarchy said, you need to have a 100% hit rate with every person you hired. Well, we all wish for that. So do I. But most likely it is not going to happen. Most likely it is not going to happen. You need to be aware of the fact that when you hire people, mishires are unfortunately part of the game. And sometimes you have the right people with the right level of experience, all the criteria are met, and you agree on a working contract very quickly, and then they enter the team, and it's simply not a fit on a personal level. They simply don't fit into the team, and you think, why does this happen? Finally, we found someone, and now we have interpersonal issues. Really? This is like kindergarten. So first, it's not. Humans do human things. However, when leaders suddenly stop to give people the benefit of the doubt, and you expect everything that they need to have from the scratch, already being held in their hands and ready for you to use, but at the same time offering a limited package of pay and benefits, you shouldn't be surprised that some people, and in this time, especially the younger generation, say, that feels a bit pointless because when I work hard, I want to have a life which is comfortable and not just barely scratch along every month thinking my money ended up being really tight. So be aware that this is an aspect that you need to invest in. And if you do it in the way that we discussed today, everything in your organization, hopefully in the wider range of economy and society, will get better from here. And I wish you all the best doing so. And when you now say, I think I need to discuss that. Very happy to do that. So first, when you watch me on YouTube, thank you very much for doing so. Leave a like here. Thank you very much for doing so. And of course, subscribe to the channel. By the way, when you listen to Apple Podcast, Spotify, please subscribe to the channel as well. Of course, feel free to leave a comment anywhere you are. We can have we always can have comments via the comment section. When you now say, hey, by the way, when you like it, I really appreciate you leaving a review here, 5 stars. Thank you very much for that. And of course, when you now say, hey, I think I really like this, please recommend this because you see, we offer all of this for free, science-backed real world experience, plus the excellence of everything that the science world includes. And there's a lot of effort put into this here. So please, if you like it, share it amongst friends, colleagues, online, offline, social media, anywhere you like. Thank you very much for doing so as well. And we have even more. When you now say, hey, the weekly episode is quite nice, but I want to have ongoing leadership tips. At the moment, via the YouTube Shorts, we offer leadership tips, including external experts that we frequently get in. These external leadership tips, you can get them via the YouTube Shorts. So it really pays off that you do not only sign up to our channel and don't only subscribe, also put a little bell on YouTube on so you get a short notification that you actually see when a new episode comes out, and you also see when our new leadership tips are on there. Of course, you can also follow me on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Thank you very much for doing so as well. And when you now say, hey, I actually think you're really good, you could help my organization, feel free to come along on my website, nb-networks.biz, and then we take it from there. And of course, you could also send me an email, nb@nb-networks.com. Looking forward to hearing from you via email because we have quite a high number of people who say, look, I have to discuss things, but due to privacy reasons, it's about my organization, happened in my company. I can't just put this in the comment section. It would be way too obvious who I am. People could track me down. Everything you send to me, I receive a wide range of emails every single week. And no worries, everything will stay fully anonymous. And of course, when you say, hey, do you actually have live sessions? Yes, we have live sessions. Very important. When you go to expert.nb-networks.com, just put your email address in there. As soon as you do so, you receive only one email every Wednesday morning. And it's 100% content, ad-free guarantee. In this email, you find full access to all the articles, all the podcasts in the English and the German language, altogether more than 1,000 episodes we now have online, plus the YouTube Shorts where we publish anything in between 1 to 4 per day. So there's a full range of advertising-free expert knowledge just for you. And of course, feel free to connect with me. Feel free to connect on LinkedIn. Looking forward to don't do the follow thing. Connect with me properly. And when you connect with me on LinkedIn, feel free to follow me on Instagram, where you see what I'm doing at the moment. You can like me on Facebook as well, and you can also, of course, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Thank you very much for doing so as well. The most important thing, however, is always the last bit I say on each and every podcast and videocast. Apply what you heard in this episode, because only when you apply what you heard, you can see the positive aspects that you obviously want to see in your organization. And by the way, if you contact me now, feel free to contact me. I answer every single message within 24 hours or less. So no worries. If you contact me, you really get a quick answer. I'm looking forward to hearing from you. If you want something very specific, you say, hey, I need training, speaking, coaching, consulting, mentoring for my business or project interim management. Very happy to discuss that. When you say, hey, I just want to have a chat, very cool. Let's do that as well. I'm open for absolutely anything. I'm looking forward to hearing from you. At the end of this podcast and at the end of the videocast, there's only one thing left for me to say. Thank you very much for your time.